Hello, everyone. Okay, so I have a question for you. Are you self critical? Do you criticize yourself? So when something happened, do the words, I'm so dumb, I'm so stupid, look at my fat ass. How did I let myself get like this? Do you criticize yourself? And if you do, kind of hang out with us for a little bit because we're going to talk about why we do that and where that actually came from. I'm Dr. Isela Garcia.
And I'm Nina Vasquez, and we would like to welcome you to the Love Being podcast.
So today our topic is being self critical. Nina, you see this a lot in the work that you do. So let's talk about what this looks like in practice when somebody is being self critical.
Okay. Yes, I see it so much in practice because half of my practice, I work with weight loss clients, people who want to lose a substantial amount of weight. And then the other half of my practice is with trauma healing. And and also in my own personal experience, I used to be this person who was very self-critical. I had self-defeating thoughts about myself every single day. And those thoughts created a lot of toxic shame. So things like I'm stupid, I'm a procrastinator, I'm lazy, I'm never going to get there. Whatever there was, I just didn't believe that I could get there. And because I would often go into a freeze nervous system response, I developed a pattern of not trusting myself. I would say I was going to do something, do it for a couple days, and then go into a freeze response, not follow through. And then I didn't trust myself. And that just gave me a lot more evidence to believe that, like, yeah, I'm lazy. I suck. I used to also think like I'm such a fat ass. I would have like really terrible things I would say to myself. And when I talk to my clients now, I always ask them, what would you say to someone who is 6 years old? Would you say these words, the words that you're saying to yourself to someone who is six? The answer is always no, Isela. It's always no, I'd never say that. And I always say, like, why do you say it to yourself? So nobody ever knows the answer to why. But if we can trace it back, usually where the root of self-criticism comes from is sometime in our childhood where our psyche, we developed a part of us that thought, if I can just criticize myself, I can be the person I need to be for whoever I need to be it for. So if you were, say, 7 or 8 years old, and the way you got love, attention, and affection was to be some version of perfect, you might have developed a protector part that was like, if I could criticize you, then maybe you'll get it together, you know? Maybe you'll actually clean your room like you're supposed to, or maybe you will not be sitting around not doing anything when your parent comes home, right? Because I want to try to I want to try to protect you. And it's so interesting to me because when I went to the army, self criticism was the thing that got like, it was almost like accepted, encouraged, like, get your shit together, kind of. And I would create an inner dialogue with myself. But at some point, self critical thinking for me and my personal journey and many of my clients, it turns into shame. At some point, it's shaming and it's no longer effective because when you feel shame, we often go to coping mechanisms, whether it's numbing, social media scrolling, eating, drinking, something to like avoid the shame. And the shame is literally coming from our internal voice, right? So at some point, it shifts and it doesn't serve you anymore. So that's been my experience with self criticism. And every time I'm with someone who's self critical of themselves, like my heart just like, I don't know what it is lately, but I just feel this like deep empathy because they don't know that they could do it any other way. And there's a
Mm.
part of them that believes if I start being nice to myself, I'm not going to get the results I want. I'm not going to get to the goal I want if I was kind, if I was loving to myself.
So I find this really fascinating because for those of you who don't have this understanding or history or knowledge of my history and what I do, I work with kids, and I have for the last 3 decades worked with and on behalf of children. And what you described is a very common approach in parenting and in our educational system. If I make you feel bad enough, then you'll want to act right.
Yeah.
That is just been since forever, been the way that parents have parented because there is a misunderstanding and the perception that children are intentionally misbehaving
Yeah.
and that they're misbehaving for attention. They're misbehaving because they just, want to be little shit. Like there's this belief. But what we understand is that it takes a really long time for our brain to develop our prefrontal cortex, where executive function is. And our executive function is what helps with self regulation. That's what helps with mental flexibility. That's what like, there's so many things that are continually developing over the course of our entire childhood and into our adulthood, our middle to late adulthood. Our self regulation skills are still developing. So, the fact that, we as children we weren't well behaved all of the time is a very normal, natural part of a growing, developing person. And so we irritate are the grown-ups who care for us, and they take it personal. You're acting this way because, right? And it might be that they're wanting connection and they're not getting the connection that they need, which is different than attention seeking, right? But the way historically adults have responded to this is by taking things away, by withholding love, by using shameful words, just doing things to try to make the child feel bad. And then you shared about the military. Now, I wasn't in the service. My husband was in the service. And we were watching Boots, which is a show that came out on Netflix recently, and it's based on a book. I think it's something like, oh, I forget, something about pink boots or something like that. But anyway, it's a show on Netflix, and it's actually about how many people in this particular case, there was a couple gay young men who went into the military and had to hide them being gay. And so that was a depiction of going to what's the first thing in boot camp? They were in boot camp.
Yes.
And kind of what they do is they rip you down in order to build you back up, right? And that's a power move. That's an absolute complete power move. And they do use shame,
Yes.
right? They use shame to rip you down. And what happens, we often come from parents who,
Yeah.
yes, loved you and all of the things, but they used shame and they use withholding love and they use all of the identifying your faults and the things that you are not perfect at. They highlighted that because if you felt bad enough, you would choose to act differently, but it wasn't a choice because your brain hasn't developed those skills just yet. And then we go to the educational system, same thing, right? It's just a probably different flavor, but it's the same thing. Like my daughter says, it's the same thing, just different font, right? And then the military and the systems and workplaces are like this too, where if you don't perform a particular way, there are consequences that you are going to need to face. And so our entire system is built on this model. So of course we're going to have these self-defeating or being self-critical of ourselves,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And just think about it. Like, for those of you watching on the podcast and not on YouTube, like, imagine you have two clouds above you. And in one cloud, you have a full list of who you're supposed to be. This is a paradigm, a belief system about what type of human you're supposed to be, all the things you're supposed to do in life that equals quote unquote successful. And this is something that you have learned over the course of your life. And you've adopted unconsciously because remember, 0 to 7, we're unconscious and we're being conditioned, right? And so you leave your childhood and maybe even early adulthood, and you have this idea in one cloud above you. And then on the other side, you have all the shame evoking thoughts that when you don't measure up to the standard that you had for yourself that you didn't even choose for yourself. One is feeding the other. It's like, I'm supposed to be this, but I don't really even want to be this. But I didn't know because somebody told me I was supposed to be this way, right? We see this a lot with, for example, if you have ADHD and you have a belief that you're not normal, right? That could be one of your
Right.
belief systems that creates shame. And that may not sound like a very critical thought, but think about it. Would you tell a 5-year-old that? Never in my
Well,
life.
I know some people that do. I know some people that do actually, unfortunately.
Fortunately, yeah.
Yeah,
If you were acting from nothing but unconditional love, you would never say those words. But
this
fear
is
will
true.
drive you to say something like that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so many things were like flashing across my mind when you were talking about this, and now they're gone. But I get really passionate about this because the ego, the part of you who wants you to keep talking to yourself this way, is keeping you from actually loving yourself. And it's afraid that if it drops this type of inner dialogue, if it drops it, that you won't be quote unquote it's something. It's successful, you won't have acceptance, you'll be rejected. There's some sort of fear-based thinking of why the ego is holding on so tightly to this pattern. Right. So if you criticize yourself, if you talk down to yourself or negative, and you'll know, like, if you're not real sure, it might take some mindfulness. Like, you might actually have to journal your thoughts down. You just write me on top of the paper and you start with I am. And as soon as you write I am, something's going to come out, right? If you're not real sure, but if you ever find yourself, I don't know if you have girlfriends like this, but some people will say something negative about themselves in front of their friends, and then their friends will like take up for them, right? If you do that, you have an inner negative or self-critical part. And if you do have that, it's going to take a lot of awareness to interrupt the pattern. You really have to become aware of like, when am I doing this? What do I really believe about myself? Does it serve me to believe these things about myself anymore?
You know, my daughter talks a lot about this, actually. My daughter is 17, and she says that these aren't necessarily her friends, but she's pretty social, and she interacts with a lot of different friend groups. And she talks about girls who say, "Oh, I'm so ugly." And then all the girls go, "No, you're not." Or like their picture that they took for their yearbook. And they're like, "Oh my goodness, I just came out so ugly." And they're like, "Oh my goodness, no, you're not. Look at how pretty your this is, or your makeup or your hair came out so good, or whatever." Right. And my daughter's really bothered by that. She's like trying to understand why people do that, number one. But like, it's like, are you fishing for compliments? Is this that you are feeling that you are not good enough or pretty enough, or there like, is it coming from that place of not believing that you are pretty, or, whatever it is that the complaint was? It's very confusing for her.
Mm.
And so we've had lots of conversations about these belief systems that are formed in our early years, and this idea of how we compare ourselves. A lot of us were raised in environments that our parents compared us to others. And it could be somebody that we are related to, or it could be somebody just like on TV or social media or something. They just the subtle comments that that we pick up on, and then they become kind of what we compare ourselves to, or this is what the ideal body type is, or this is what the ideal hair texture is. This is what the ideal face. My daughter uses the term. What is the term when somebody is attractive based on culture? Um, there's a term for that.
I don't know what that is.
What is it? She Oh, there's a term where you're like, because based on the culture that you come from, this is what's considered attractive. Because every
And
culture has their own definition of
that's
what
right.
attractive is.
Oh, yeah.
And so, yeah, we've talked about that. And so, yeah, so I'm curious about this. And I think part of this process isn't just the delving into kind of our own perceptions and beliefs, but being curious about where do these ideas come from. And I know my mom, she was embarrassed by her mother, my grandmother, and my grandmother was overweight. And my mom wasn't overweight when I was growing up, and she was so embarrassed by my grandmother that she hyper focused on staying thin. And her perception of me, and I wasn't heavy as a child, I just was built different than everybody else in my family. I had thicker legs and
Mhm.
thicker thighs. And ironically, that was actually very well received by the Mexican culture. But my mom in her head, because she was projecting her own stuff from her mother, and she saw me as heavy because I had thicker legs.
Mm.
And so much of the messages that we take on come from these little, sometimes subtle experiences, and then sometimes not so subtle, right?
Yeah, thank you for the word curiosity, right? To go down that path because as you're talking, I'm remembering we all, most of us grew up with some sort of comparison to somebody else. And I remember growing up, I was a whopping, in high school, a whopping 120 pounds or something. Where I grew up, it was predominantly white. And a lot of the girls who were white were very thin, like almost what they had a body type that some would think is anorexic, but they weren't. They were just very thin. And the comparison for me started back then, thinking I was supposed to look like them. But I'm also Hispanic. I also have curvy hips and legs. And then it's so interesting. I went from their high school to the army where I was told point blank that because I was curvy, I would struggle with my weight. And I did in the army with the regulations. Here's what I want to make sure people know. If you have a belief at a young age, really young age, that something's wrong with you, and then you go from that time, you will continue to look for evidence of it your whole life. And that's what happened with
Mhm.
me. Like, oh, these girls are stick thin. I'm supposed to be that. More evidence something's wrong with me. Oh, I go to the army. I'm curvy. They tell me point blank, like literally, verbally tell me I'm going to struggle. And there's more evidence. Something must be wrong with me because I'm not the way I quote unquote should be. And when we can sit down and look at our life experiences with curiosity, like where did these beliefs come from? What made me think that the way that my body was shaped was wrong? I have a client that she learned her body was shaped like her family. She's from a Hispanic family too. Her tias, her mom, she overheard them in another room talking about the shape of her body, and it has affected her whole life. So where did we get like this idea that we're all supposed to look the same?
I think this is also true for I think it's true for a lot of different things in our lives, but I think this is especially true for people who are neurodivergent.
Mm.
There is a societal there are societal norms that can be challenging. Even someone who has ADHD, it's like, why can't I get my shit together? Why am I always losing things? Why am I always late? Like, I can't, even when I try. And I know for me, when I was figuring out how to navigate being ADHD, I could wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning to be someplace by 9, and I would still be pushing it. Like, I was still run late, even though I had gotten up, gotten everything together by, 3 hours before I'm supposed to be somewhere, and I'm still running late. And it's like, why? Why do I keep doing this? And, I was one of those people that Christina and I have had this conversation before where I didn't do the thing like, I'm so late, I'm so dumb, I'm so stupid. Like, I didn't do that internal dialogue. I would go, why do I keep doing this? So my framing would be different. Why can't I get this shit together? Why is this so hard? So for me, it was a question about the why more than blaming myself or being ashamed that
Yeah.
I can't get somewhere on time.
Yeah.
And so I think how we internalize it's important to explore that. The other thing that you mentioned that really stuck out for me was it becomes part of our identity, I think. And what you said was something like, if you have been told your whole life that you're lazy
Yeah.
and you start to believe, and I don't mean your whole life, but your childhood, that you're lazy. And then you start to believe, I'm lazy. I'm never going to get this done. I'm going to start a new project and I have all these good intentions and I'm just never going to get it done. I'm so lazy, right? I think part of what makes this challenging is it's become, in essence, part of our identity. I am someone who consistently lies to myself. I am somebody who doesn't stay true to what I said I was going to do. I am someone, right? And I think to your point about the ego is saying, if I'm not that, then what am I? So if I let go of the belief that I am not lazy, if I let go of the belief that I am not fat, if I let go of the belief that I am not pretty, then
Mhm.
what am I?
Right.
And even though what we're holding on to is not great, it's
Yeah.
a lie. It's bad information based on somebody else's issues, and it's been
Mhm.
projected onto us, and it could be social conditioning. They ain't got nothing to even to do with our family, but what we saw on social media or experiences even outside our home, right? But our brain and our body and our ego is going, if I'm not that, then what the hell am I? And that's terrifying.
So scary, right? So scary. If I am no longer any of the story that I had been, then who am I? And I think that is the most challenging part because the ego
Yeah.
just wants to hold on and just wants to be right. Meaning, I just want to keep proving myself right. I don't want to change.
And how dare I think that I'm actually attractive?
I know.
How dare I think that I'm lovable?
Mhm.
How dare I think I'm worthy of a healthy relationship? How dare I think that? And I think it's safer, even though it's not healthy, to stick with what is familiar.
Yeah, doesn't feel as scary. But I love your word dare because it reminds me of the word audacity. Like having the audacity to say, I am
Yeah.
worthy of a loving relationship. Having the audacity to like look yourself in the mirror and say, this will feel so weird, but like wink at yourself and say, you're so beautiful, even when you don't believe it yet.
Mhm.
Having the audacity to say, no, it is my birthright to love myself unconditionally. Because here's what's never changed. And this is the part that, that really helped me. Something that never changes is your divine, infinite intelligence walking. You are love. That never changes. And so if you can see that, it's hard for me to explain the visual I have. It's more like you're the human in this experience, but in the experience, that something that can never be changed is your divine love. You're just love. So even when you don't believe you are, you still are. Even when you're believing all these negative things about yourself, that still hasn't changed, right? It's the actual ego trying to convince you otherwise. And if it can get you to stay down that path, it's distracting you from remembering that you are love walking.
There's a saying, you don't have to believe it to be true.
Yes.
You don't have to believe it to be true. So even though you have believed all of these things, the fact is you are a divine being with so much to offer this world.
Yeah.
You are quite remarkable.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we didn't get that memo early on. So back to your question about what I would suggest. Okay, so this is a thing that in our challenges and in the work that we do with folks, we have them do. This is one of those things where you begin to look at yourself with adoration instead of shame.
Mm.
And so you spend ideally 3 minutes initially, but for some people, this is very hard. And so if we can do five seconds, 10 seconds, and what you do is you focus on a part, like you get in front of a mirror, okay? And the mirror is up to you. For some people, they can't do a full length mirror when they first do this. They have to do a handheld mirror. Sometimes even like a makeup mirror, little tiny ones that come in your little compact.
Yeah.
That's all I can look at is one eye.
Yeah.
And so you focus on one part of your body, and that can be an eyeball. It could be just your eyes. It could be your hair. It could be your lips, your neck, your chest, your shoulder. It doesn't matter, but choose one. And what you want to do is you want to pull in to yourself, and this is where the connecting with our emotional selves is so critically important, because we want to activate the feeling of adoration, the feeling of love, the feeling. And, I work with kids. So this is a very familiar sensation for me, where I'll see kids like do amazing things or get excited about something, or like, play with children. And I'm like, oh, they're like, that's an amazing thing. And so I get this sensation in my, for me, it's in my chest, and it's just this sensation of love. And think it's like it's a flood of oxytocin, right? It's just this feel good experience. And what you want to begin to do is focus on that one eyeball and see if you can activate within you the feeling of adoration, the feeling of I love you, the feeling of that. For some people, looking at their whole face is too much, because we're going to look at the pimples and the blemishes and the aging and the this and the that, and right, the thinning of the hair and all of this that many of us, especially if you are at our age, that you might be dealing with, right? So you're going to focus on those things. So just start with something simple. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to rewire these experiences, and you're just trying to acknowledge that you are, without question, this incredible being, and that you are lovable, that you are worthy of love. And instead of continually seeking outside of ourselves to find that answer and that feeling, we start to offer it to ourselves. And so you begin small. activate the feeling within you, even if it's like your dog. Like a lot of people can feel that for their pets,
Mhm.
and they have this warmth, gushy feeling just being with their pets. It's the same sort of sensation. So you activate that within you. You just look at the one eyeball and say something kind to yourself. You might even thank your eye, like literally thank your eye for your vision.
Mhm. Mm.
Thank your nose for your ability. I have like one of those crazy ass noses where I can smell something very quickly and so I'm thank my nose for that. It's like you want to start to form a different relationship with how you perceive yourself.
That's a beautiful practice. I love this practice.
One of the things for sort of like our behaviors, like my example of being late, right? This consistent being late. Why can't I get anywhere on time? That kind of thing. I think we just have to form a different relationship with our perceptions of ourselves. That was really what helped me. I'm like, yeah, sometimes that happens. Sometimes that happens. It doesn't make me a bad person. It doesn't make me wrong. It just that my brain and my body processes information differently. The way that I experience the world is different. And there's nothing wrong with that. The perception that something is wrong with that didn't come from me. It comes from our social conditioning. And so that's the problem. So if I start to just change my awareness of that, right? And my beliefs around that, then I can navigate through these experiences without feeling shameful about it. And so I would sometimes, not sometimes, I would often apologize. And the way that I would apologize, like, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I even set my alarm early and I still got here late and I can't ever seem to get here on time and blah, 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 blah. I shifted that. And instead, I would walk in and I said, thank you for your patience.
I love that.
So that's it. Thank you for waiting on me. That's
Mhm.
it. And I stopped apologizing for the fact that sometimes, even with my best intentions, I was still late. Instead of beating myself up and telling me that, oh, because it's the dominant culture that has all these rules around time. And my culture doesn't really care as much about time. And so there's not just my ADHD, there's also the expectations and societal norms. And so for me, I just started to shift that here I am trying to navigate in a culture that doesn't feel natural to me. And
Mm.
so I just acknowledge that I process information and my experience is just uniquely different. And I am okay with that.
That is powerful. I love the neutralizing. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. That is the way that I came to accept my what some people would call procrastination. Sometimes I procrastinate, sometimes I don't was the thing that really shifted for me. It was just made it neutral. Like, cause the truthful thing is I am a procrastinator wasn't true because there are some things I don't procrastinate on. And so once I neutralized it, it's just like I gave no energy to it anymore. And so it took it from, like you said, you don't, you're not identifying as this and you're not identifying as it being wrong or something wrong with it, right? Yeah, so what you give energy
Yeah.
to, right? And
Yeah.
to stop giving energy to it and they'll be like, this is just it happens sometimes.
Sometimes,
Yeah.
sometimes this happens. And it's okay for it to happen sometimes. Like, we're not striving for perfection. We're striving to really just drop into this human experience and be present with all that is.
Mm.
That's all that's being asked of us. And so there are some days that I don't get out the house in time to get someplace that I need to be. But there are other times where I get there with plenty of time. So I stopped taking all of these notions, these ideas, personally.
Yeah.
I just stopped doing that. So I give myself grace and I just acknowledge that some days it's good and great and all things are well, and other days so much, but that's okay. It's just fine. And that self-forgiveness piece, that like recognizing this human experience, I think is just such a liberating part of releasing the critical nature. If this is something that you have struggled with, just notice it. That's all you need to do. Just notice it and start just neutralizing it. Don't give it power anymore.
Yeah. And I feel like I'm supposed to mention complex trauma. So if you're listening and you have CPTSD, also known as complex trauma, you're a survivor. You may experience some rigidity right now as we're talking, like almost this trying to tap into how I would have felt before. A little bit of like, that's impossible, kind of like there's no way I can get out of this suffering that I am in. Because literally, that's what it is. It's a form of suffering created by your internal being. And I'm not in any way, I am not saying, I don't want to say that you're the problem. Um, this this toxic shame is a symptom of complex trauma, and it's developed by our psyche internally. And so, if you feel like, oh, I don't know how this is actually possible for me to like neutralize, like say, like sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. No big deal. Here's why: we have a rigidity in our brain because if I can stay rigid, I'm going to keep you safe. So if I stay in this box, I'll be safe. So what me and Isela are proposing is a little bit of flexibility, neuroplasticity, and what we're proposing this, and it's going to take some time. So if you're feeling like this is impossible for me right now, just start with awareness, like Isela said. Start with awareness. Oh, there I went again, criticizing myself and feeling shame. Oh, I identify as these things. Start with awareness and try not to be so hard on yourself about feeling a little bit like this is impossible because I would have felt that way. I did feel that way when I first learned that my thoughts, my internal thoughts, were creating my suffering and the shame that I was feeling in my body. And I thought, well, something must be wrong with me because I can't change my thoughts. And so really just start with awareness and, just raise your hand to like, whoa, that resonated with me, or that didn't resonate with me, or I don't criticize myself at all, or I do criticize myself and I want to change it. I feel so passionate about this because it was such a big part of my life. Like, goodness, 40 years, 40 years of just hating myself. So if you are hating yourself, you can love yourself again. So I just want to share that, like, there's hope. There's hope.
So I have a question about you're being self-critical. My question is, did other people know that you hated yourself? Was that, do you think, apparent to others?
I don't think that other people really knew. I hid it very well. I would say things outwardly like I love myself. I was so confident. I pretended to be so confident. I just didn't, it wasn't true. Internally, I hated myself, full of shame, thought something was wrong with me. I'm not good enough. I think it evoked emotion because I remember the feeling of feeling stuck there. Like, how am I ever going to get out of this? It's like outwardly, I was this confident. I was a supervisor for the army. Like, I was super confident. From the outside in, you would have thought, Nina has her shit together. I have had family members tell me they thought I had my shit together when I told them I was suffering with deep depression and, things like this. And they're like, we would have had no idea. So I don't think people knew that I hated myself. Now, when I started doing personal development work, that's when I realized, oh, like, I don't actually like myself. And I sat down and I put like, I am and finished the sentences, and they were all critical. I didn't have much to say good, you know? So yeah, that was my experience. And now I realize it's like a safety strategy as well. Like I don't want anybody else to know that I don't like myself internally.
I think that's something that might resonate with a lot of people is that I think there are many people who are, you know, going day to day, living their day to day life, appearing as though all is well.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
in the privacy of their own quiet evenings, time alone, that's when those truths start to show up for them.
Yes, and for
Yeah.
those of us who are, who it shows up like that for, we distract ourselves from ourselves. So,
Mhm.
any kind of for me personally, it's like any type of coping mechanism I could do to distract myself from myself. How would I ever be conscious of the way I talk to myself if I never spend time with myself at all?
Yeah.
If 95% of what we think, feel, and do is unconscious, it's so easy to not know that you talk to yourself this way because it's super unconscious.
Yeah. Well, we hope that this conversation was helpful to you, and we invite you to really reflect upon your internal dialogue and to, kind of move in the direction of possibly trying the strategy of just noticing, connecting with yourself, being curious as to what that internal dialogue is, and even kind of where that originated from, because 99% of the time it didn't originate from you. And so you get to say, hey, this was never mine to begin with, and start really coming into knowing yourself and loving yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. You get to give it back. Just give it back to where
Mhm.
it came from. And if you feel like you could use some support on your journey, you don't have to do this alone. Isela and I have a community. It's called the Love Being Community. And we would love to have you. We have coaching calls, we do weekly readings, we have sacred teachings that go on in that community weekly. So don't do this by yourself. Get support. That was one of the biggest regrets I have on my personal development journey. For the first 5 years, I tried to do it on my own. And, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back the whole time. And so if you feel like our message and the way we teach and the way we guide and mentor resonates with you, come join us. We'd love to have you.